pick a lane. Make sure that you build your niche, build where you want to be, limit your geography. Don't try and be everything to everybody.
I don't throw darts at a board. I bet on sure things. Read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Every battle is won before it's ever fought. Think about it.
Hey, I just wrapped an interview with Michael McCreary, an OG in our industry. We covered a bunch of territory in this interview, from how he got into the business, what he's seeing changing, and the bedrock fundamentals that will never change in property management. I think you're going to like this one. Check it out. Welcome to another episode of the Profitable Property Management Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Moyla, and today I have Michael McCreary with me. Michael, thanks for coming on the show.
It's so great to be here, Jordan.
Michael, where did you come in from?
I'm coming from Marietta, Georgia, which is 20 miles northwest of Atlanta.
Fantastic. Michael, I'm excited to have you on and hear a little bit about your background. You are an industry figure. You've been in the game for a long time. If we just rewind the clock all the way back, how did you get your start in property management?
Probably around 1965, when my grandfather came to my father and said, we've got all this inventory. We see this opening with Lockheed ramping up all this production for property management. Will you start a property management division for the family real estate business? And my father said, well, of course. And so I kind of grew up in the business. I started taking emergency phone calls nights and weekends. I painted houses. I mowed grass. I planted mailboxes. I helped Dad with evictions, all kinds of things, all the way into my 20s.
Well, this is extremely interesting. It's a rare treat. And I say that not simply out of nostalgia, but out of the unique vantage point. You've seen a lot change. You've seen a lot shift. I've seen a lot change, and I've been here a lot shorter period of time than you. So I'm curious, what sticks out in your mind if you think back to the different epochs, eras, some key inflection points? What sticks out as some of the key events or shifts in the industry since you've been in it?
Well, there's just if you look at every aspect of what property managers touch, there's been change, and it's been significant change. There's an old saying that the only two things certain in life are death and taxes. Well, there's a third one. It's called change. And that is absolutely, if you're not part of the change, you're getting left behind. And really, I mean, from tenant screening to leases. I mean, Mom and Dad's first lease was typed on a IBM Selectric typewriter, and it was one page on one side.
Simple, easy.
Oh man. And, so much of it was handshake agreements. And, many of the houses were old World War II era homes, and they didn't have built-in appliances. Tenants had to have their own their own refrigerator and their own range. That was normal back then. When I first started working with my parents in '82 in property management, the average house didn't even have a refrigerator. I'd say maybe 20% of our inventory had a refrigerator. So everything about the industry has changed. The technology. When I first started working with my parents, the accounting system was the McBee OneWrite system, which was this ledger card system with a master page that you inserted in, and you wrote receipts or wrote checks, and it recorded everything so that you could keep up with stuff.
But it's interesting they were using technology in that regard.
But that was
cutting edge.
It was absolutely cutting edge. And so we bought our first computer in 1983. And that was also the year that the Reagan Tax Reform Act had really started taking flight, and they were building duples, tris, and quads all over the place in our area to sell to individuals to help take advantage of tax shelters, because you could get double declining balance on depreciation as well as cost of components. So instead of 29 and a half years straight line depreciation, you could get it done in about 7.5 years. Major. And people were paying huge taxes back then, even with some of the other changes that had happened. I sold a Lockheed engineer a duplex in 1981, in December of 81, and closed it. He got an FHA investor mortgage with 15% down at 17.5% interest. But it made sense because of the depreciation, his tax basis, and him saying, if I'm going to spend this money, I'm either writing a check to the IRS or I'm writing a check to myself, and at least I'm building something and owning this piece of real estate. So A lot of crazy decisions get made because of circumstances and the government and regulations and everything else, just like we've experienced with owners not being willing to do much with the eviction moratorium and wanting to just cash out. So.
There's so many inflection points. One of the ones that sticks out is you mentioning the 17% interest rates. This was when inflation was spiking. And one of the infamous characters was Paul Volcker at the Fed, who had the will to actually ratchet things up. Who can imagine in the current political climate, the Fed having the will to go that high? It worked. It fixed the problem, but that's an incredible amount of political will and political capital expended in order to get that done. How do you see inflation impacting our industry right now?
Oh, it's huge. Just a great example. It's costing me almost double what it did 2 years ago to get an interior of a home painted on a turn right now. That's ginormous. I mean, you can't almost wrap your head around that. What was a $1,700 paint job now is a $3,400 paint job. And
wow, that's wild.
A lot of that has to do with labor. A lot of that has to do with the cost of supplies, but it's also just what the market has starting to bear. You go out there and try and find licensed and insured vendors that can do this kind of work. You're going to be paying prices. And so that's the hard part for us now, is continuing to ferret out the best price with the best combination of price, service, quality of work, and timeliness to get it done.
And the interesting thing about inflation is that a big part of it is a story. It's a game of telephone. You hear about it, I react, you react to my reaction. It's kind of this loop you get caught in. How does the owner relate to these bids going up, and you're kind of caught in the middle?
Right. So I'm calling it sticker shock. Is definitely that. So we're preparing it. We've already been communicating with our property owners on a regular basis over the last couple of years with events about what was going on with COVID and the restrictions and all the things we were dealing with and how we were addressing it with residents and such. But we've expanded that now to come back and say, all of those are gone, but we've got a new set of problems. And the new set of problems is just getting the work done and how much things are costing and the ability to get an appliance and working with tenants to help them understand we can't get a dishwasher for 6 weeks because they just don't exist. They're in a container out in the Pacific. And thankfully, the press has done a great job of helping us educate folks about the supply chain issues. And also in many cases, they've discovered that in their own personal home when they're wanting to do some work on their own personal home or they need to replace an appliance. They're witnessing the same thing. But it's really all about communication and information and giving them the facts and not embellishing it and not, woe is me and wringing our hands. We're just it's just another problem to be solved. And I think, Jordan, one of the best definitions of a property manager is problem solver. Because if there were no problems to be solved, I wouldn't have a job. There would be no problems. Everybody would honor the leases that were signed. Everybody would pay always on the first. There'd never be late rent. There'd never be bounce checks. What would I do most of the month?
Yeah, exactly. When you look at some of these software programs that get offered to DIY landlords at face value, if you've never been in the industry, it seems to make sense. Well, you could use this software to collect the rent and to handle an invoice. What more do you need? It's not until you're actually in it that you realize all of the complexity and how property managers actually earn a buck.
Right.
On this subject of technology, what's the wave that you've seen take hold of the industry from, let's say, I don't know, you tell me, when did technology start having a meaningful impact on your business and kind of this current iteration of cloud-based solutions, et cetera? What did that transition look like?
Sure. It started basically in the mid-90s with the development of the PC and it getting out into the small business world, because most of us in the do SFR are all small businesses. So we didn't buy mainframes or rent mainframes or do that sort of thing. And even then, the software product was basically an accounting package with a small database management. And so we started to see them evolve through the 90s and into the 2000s. And after the dot-com bust, we finally started to see the cloud evolve in the earliest part of this, of the first decade of this century. And that has just continued. And a lot of that was promoted by the speed of the internet. When we had our first website and started doing things on the internet and posting listings on the internet, it was all dial-up. or it was DSL at best. And so broadband just didn't exist. And as things continue to improve, you saw that the speed of the computing, the speed of the connections, and then another revolution, of course, was the infamous
Smartphone,
iPhone.
absolutely.
Smartphone, iPhone, Android, whatever it might be. There's more computing power in that phone than in every single PC I bought from the 90s until now. It's amazing what's in this and the capability for me to learn and do anything from anywhere. I can now run my business sitting right here in this chair, and I'm 900 miles from my business.
That's a beautiful
And people don't
thing.
even know that. So yeah, it's I've done several things already today. Nobody had any idea I was here except for my out of office message on my email.
Let's talk a little bit more about your business. Give me some background, some context. How many staff members do you have?
Right now we have a total of 8. 2 are remote team members, and 6 are boots on the ground.
And is it exclusively single family properties?
It's single family properties for lease as well as single family homeowners associations.
What's the mix?
Sure. We have approximately 150 single family homes that we lease and 43 associations with 2,900 doors.
Interesting. And SFH came first and then
Yes.
HOA?
SFH has existed ever since the 60s that my dad did. And I saw the opportunity in the mid-90s that this was a potential for us, because one of the things that was happening in the mid-90s is in our area, all the municipalities and the counties were requiring mandatory homeowners associations within the zoning for the developments. There was no choice. And you make something mandatory, the only way you can undo it, if you've got 100 home communities, you get all 100 homes
Unanimous.
to agree.
What are the odds of that?
Yeah. Well, they can't even agree that the sun sets in the east sets in the west and rises in the east. They can't even agree on that. So how are you ever going to get them to disband an HOA? It's not going to happen. And they don't have the sophistication and understanding of volunteer leadership and how to manage these things. So there has to be a place for a proper manager in there. And that's made a huge difference.
It's fascinating to me how little cross-pollination there is between SFR and HOA. You've been a fixture here with NARPM. Have you also been heavily involved in the HOA, CAI, that world?
Not heavily involved in CAI, frankly. Most of it has just been me figuring out where the sweet spot was for me, finding where the niche was. And for me, it was the 20 to 100 home detached single families. They may or may not have a pool. Their annual collections, vast majority of the work is back office work. Really the secret sauce is just like it is with SFR. Answer the phone, respond to emails. Because in the large management company world, those properties are throwaways. They don't pay attention to them. They're not respected, and they don't get the attention because, frankly, they're used as filler for a portfolio of a community manager. And so he or she may have 3 or 4 communities that are well over 500 homes each. In fact, maybe one even be over 1,000. And then they might have 2 or 3 that are smaller than that, with one being around 80 or 90 homes. So if that 1,000 home president calls the manager at the exact same time the 90 home manager calls, what's human nature tell you?
You're going to give priority to the bigger dog.
Exactly. And these people realize it because the number one complaint they have when they're coming to look for management, changing management or leaving from self-management, is communication and understanding and being able to get the work done.
What about the profitability of these two disparate business units?
It is different because the pricing model is different. But the thing that's really different with them is that you've already built this infrastructure of staffing for your SFR, and hardly ever are you at complete capacity with that. So this being so much back office fills into there. I've looked at my association management business as being a profit center that pays for pretty much all of my office operations, my rent, the high-speed fiber internet that we have to have for the facility, and pays for all of that and all the other the copies and things, all the pieces and parts that make the company work. All of that's covered, plus profit by the HOA enterprise.
Let's talk some basic blocking and tackling of property management.
Sure.
Have you taught any classes over the years?
Yes.
what classes, this is a leading question because I know the answer. What classes have you taught over the years, Michael?
Well, from NARPM, I've taught every single one of the designation classes except for the maintenance company one. And that's because I don't have a maintenance company that I own. I don't feel comfortable doing that one, but I've done all of the others. I've helped rewrite all of those starting in 2015 and adding to them, putting an appendix in them for the first time with additional documentation, additional research, forms, systems, working with several vendors to get them to contribute some of their product in there as long as we gave them recognition that it was their product. And it's been a great thing to really help improve the education and the product that we were offering through NARPM.
What class have you taught the greatest number of times?
One of them is Personnel Procedures Essentials. I've taught that one probably 4 times in the last 2 years. The Office Operations, Profitability, and Client Relations. The Risk Management classes. I love the risk management classes, and I really enjoy teaching those.
You know, one of the things that's so notably different about property management is it's very uncommon to have a small business doing, let's say, $1 million in top line revenue, and to also have several $100,000 of cash just kind of sitting there they're supposed to hold on to. Don't pay, don't touch it. Just keep safe hands on it. It seems kind of fundamentally like a recipe for disaster for most organizations. When you look at the controls that are put in place to be able to make sure that that money is in fact kept safe, what's your short list of best practices for the owner to make sure that they're on top of things?
Sure. Now, one of them is you separate AP and AR.
Sure.
You don't want the same people doing both jobs. You require 2 signatures on every check that goes out. You require 2 signatures or 2 codes nowadays on initiating ACHs and paying owners and paying vendors and that sort of thing, so that you can make sure that things are taken care of. The reporting functions that are in all of the software packages now are incredible. And so it gives us the opportunity to really stay on top of things much easier than it ever was before. We also have banking controls in with the banks, and that will alert us with certain things. I had one where we got a check that got washed, sent through the U.S. mail. And unfortunately, that's prompted us, between that and a whole bunch of delivery issues, it's prompted us to go into greater detail in working with our vendors to allow us to do ACH payments directly to them instead of mailing checks anymore. And it's just gotten to where it's not reliable. But in that particular instance, because with the banking regulation, the banking procedures that we had in place with our institution, there was no problem at all in covering that check because of this criminal act.
I want to ask you a question. When you think back on some of the lowest moments in a very long career, what sticks out as a really challenging circumstance that you had to figure out a way to work through?
That's a great question because it's an unusual response for most management companies and managers. Our office was attacked by arsonist through a firebomb through the back window of the office. Yes, a firebomb, Molotov cocktail, 15 minutes after the last person left on a Thursday afternoon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Didn't see that coming.
No.
What now? How can you contextualize this? Was there a backstory? Was there an intent? Was there a motive?
Unfortunately, we were just the victim of circumstance at that point in time because this arsonist had already been at work in Marietta, and he had ended up eventually attacking 8 different law firms, 2 insurance companies, and 2 real estate companies.
So was there a method to the madness in terms of who was being targeted? It was just
no. For whatever reason, that was the institutions that he chose.
Wow.
I don't know whether they found him. They could not get enough evidence to convict him. So basically they sat on him and ran him out of town.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they just couldn't do it. But they almost got him convicted because one of the things they discovered is that he was really a police and fire and security guard type nut. And so his apartment was full of memorabilia and paraphernalia from that. And they almost got him to confess to it when they offered to put him on the back of the hook and ladder, dress him up and spin up the siren and lights and take him on a tour around town.
Wow.
They almost got him.
That is wild. So in terms of the particulars, did the actual interior of the office?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, wiped out.
Not completely wiped out, but essentially was. By the time they demoed the building, all that was left was the 4 walls and the foundation.
What year was this?
So it was 1994.
So this is in a year where this is pre cloud computing.
Mm-hmm.
Take my PC, run it over with the truck. I'm fine. I'll go buy another and re-download it. That must have been a real setback.
It was, and it wasn't, because we were very blessed. That first computer I told you we bought in '83, one of the things that they beat into us was daily backups, and to have a 2-week routine of daily backups where you did a backup every day at 5 o'clock, shut down. 5 o'clock, you do a backup. Don't do any business. Take them, put the backups in a briefcase. Take them off site. That was our saving grace.
That is wild.
So on Tuesday morning, when we got the replacement computer and we had the phone system, we had this temporary office set up and everything. All we did was plug that back up in, do a restore, and it was the next business day.
That is absolutely wild.
And we also had a procedure where we just didn't leave files laying out on desk. But in this particular instance, there were 2 files that were lost. But otherwise, we didn't have to recreate any files. It was just get the smoke odor out of them. And that smoke odor, I can still smell it and taste it in the back of my throat today.
Oh my!
Every time I think about it. But it was a insurance term. It was the limits policy limits claim. So it ended up wiping out everything. And even though we had been a client with this particular insurance company ever since my grandfather started the business in the mid-50s, they canceled us. Even before the fire department determined that we weren't involved. I mean, they interviewed my ex-wife. They interviewed all of us. They talked to our contractors. They looked at previous tenants, applicants, owners. They looked at everybody, but they finally found this person and tracked him down. Turns out that the way they found him was he pretended to be our security guard and got to walk through the building while the firemen were there and cleaning up. So he got to see his handiwork.
Wow.
It's real sick stuff. But the challenge to overcome that and not lose your business was amazing. And so it was really, really a lot of diligent, hard work, but by me and my parents and the other staff members at the time to save the business. Owners were working with us. Tenants, not a problem. Everything just worked great because we were just on top of it and didn't let it own us.
A ton of resilience there. Let's keep on this theme.
Sure.
Walk me through a great court battle. Walk me through a tenant situation, an owner situation where you had to duke it out and you came out on the right side of it.
Well, the property management world is littered with evictions, and that's almost always the case. We had very seldom. I can only think of 3 times that we had an owner sue us in all the years we've been around. And going back to my grandfather's company in '82 through McCreary, which started in 1990. So we've been McCreary for 32 years now, and 8 years as that. So we're at 40 years doing all this. And we only had 3 owners sue us during that period of time. So I think we're doing something right there.
That is impressive. What about on the tenant side, though?
Tenant side, we've it's probably happens about once every 5 years we get sued over a security deposit claim in small claims court, and we've won every single one of those because of the documentation that we do. The only thing I haven't been able to perfect is being able to bag up enough of the carpet so that the owner can, so that the judge can smell what it smelled like when the tenant moved out. So I don't have smell-o-vision yet, but that's really the key is documentation left and right, following the law. Georgia law is very, very codified, specific on how we return deposits. We've got 3 business days to do the inspection and a total of 5 business days from the day they turn in the keys to tender to the tenant what we think we're going to be deducting from. So hardly ever do we get real numbers. We have to estimate. But we have 30 days total to complete the accounting. So we then have to come back afterwards once we have the real numbers and adjust the deposit transmittal at that point in time.
What's the worst circumstance you've ever seen during a move out?
I've seen a lot. Some of the saddest ones are where children are involved. We had an eviction we had to do where the tenant made no effort whatsoever moving out. It's just like when we got there. Yeah, when we got there at 1 in the afternoon to do the eviction, it was as if she just left that morning on a regular work day. No boxing, no nothing. The curtains on the wall, everything on the windows, art on the wall. Everything set up properly, nothing packed whatsoever. And we had a crew of 6 or 7 there for this 3-bedroom house. And what was worse was at about 2:45, the school bus stops out front and her children get off the bus as we're emptying their bedrooms out onto the street, onto the curb. That was tough. Then we couldn't find her. This was in the days before cell phones were really popular, and she wasn't responding at work, clearly wasn't home. And so the sheriff, deputy sheriff, had to contact Children's Services, and they had to deal with the children for us while they sat in the back of the sheriff's car watching us putting everything else out onto the street.
Wow.
Tough. One of the first things I did when I started working with my parents is I really, my heart was, felt for that to the point of pain, those types of circumstances. And so I went to a church that I went to, Roswell Street Baptist Church, and they had a business minister, and I went and sat and talked with him. And he really gave me some good feedback and understanding on my responsibility and what I need to do, and how, no matter how tough it is, biblically where we were. Now, I know not everybody subscribes to any sort of Christian religion, and I'm fine with that, but there's tenets like that throughout all the famous religions in the world. Karma, 70 times 7, you name it. There's something out there where people will get done unto them whatever they've done unto us, usually worse. We may never know about it. I don't need to know about it. I rest well at night knowing that if they've done unto me and done unto my client, that they will unfortunately have to pay for it in some way, usually much larger than what they did to us.
Sure. You're working on behalf of the owner.
That's right.
That ultimately is who the client is.
Yes, absolutely. That's where my fiduciary responsibility is.
And what is the profile of your average owner? Is it an accidental? Is it an investor?
We're about 50-50, where it's the owner that did not intend on getting that property, accidental investor by circumstance, that sort of thing. And I have fun with those. I really enjoy working with those folks because it appeals to me as an educator, because I get to teach them how to be a good investor owner of rental property and what it really means and what to expect, because it's not all really roses and sweethearts and candy out there. It's tough business, and if you're not prepared for it, you can have some real problems. And the worst part about the accidental investor is particularly when it was the home that they live in, and it was their principal residence. They have emotional attachment to it. And, when you move out of a house, whether you've lived there for a year or 5 years or whatever, you never really realize how dirty you lived until you get all the furniture out of the house, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So these owners don't remember that. All they remember is how the house looked when they lived there. And 3 or 4 years down the road, they come to see the house after the first tenant moves out. And oh my God, they've destroyed our house. Oh, look at this. I can't believe they did that. I painted that. That kind of thing. And so helping them understand how to disconnect the emotion from the project and making it the family business instead of the family home really is satisfying. But there are certain situations where that can just not happen. And I've counseled several folks that, no, you need to sell. You don't need
just
to
get out.
Just
too much emotional duress.
You got too much emotion tied up into this property. I think it would be a great investment property, but you would pay for it dearly.
I think those that know you can sense the educator in you. Mm-hmm. How do you see that show up specifically in a sales conversation? You're talking to a prospective owner. Mm-hmm. What does that education look like beyond just, hey, here's what we do, here's our services, here's a fact sheet? Mm-hmm. How do you educate during the sales process? Sure.
We talk about return on investment. We talk about the reason why you own the piece of property. What are your goals and objectives? That's one of the first questions I want to ask is, why do you own this, and what are your expectations? What's your goals and objectives? Many owners will tell us, well, I'm buying this, I'm going to keep it, and then when my child gets to college age, I'm going to sell it and I'll be able to pay for college. Admirable goal. But it tells me what I need to know, because if they had instead came to me and said, I'm only going to own this for a couple of years, we're going to sell it to a developer and they're probably going to tear the house down. completely different management philosophies from a maintenance standpoint as well as tenant selection standpoint, because we've got to find somebody that's only wants to be in the property for a year or two at the most. And we know that the property owner is not willing to put in a brand new heating and air system, only to have the house torn down, that sort of thing. Whereas if it's the long-term hold, where it's somebody who's going to want to have a completely different maintenance philosophy as well as tenant selection philosophy. You want to find somebody that's going to be in there 5 to 7 years that maximizes your investment in your turn in getting the property ready for a tenant to move in, but doesn't penalize you by letting them stay longer. Because most people think, oh, a 10 or 12-year tenant's fantastic. Look at that. Most people don't keep up with the rent increases. And in most states, your sole compensation for normal wear and tear is the collection of the monthly rent. So if you're $100 or $200 or $300 a month light on the rent, look at what you're leaving behind. That $3,600 you could have collected this year, that would have paid for your new flooring, but you didn't. So now you got to come out of pocket with it. And so helping owners understand this part of it, helping them become better business people at operating this is what's so enjoyable with it for me.
Talk to me about scope of services. You're talking about, tell me your goals, and depending on that, we can contextualize what to do.
Right.
The reality is, as a PM, you could offer many different services, do things many different ways for many different people. What are the lines in the sand that you draw? What are the edges of the box where you say, this is what you're getting, this is how we do things, and we're not going to color outside of these lines? What are those lines for you?
Typically, it's from the accounting side. The rent's due on the 1st, late at night on the 6th. We pay owners between the 10th and 12th of the month, and that sort of thing. If they want to do things differently out of that, we can accommodate it, because there's certain economies of scale you have to have in place. Otherwise, you'll just drive yourself nuts. It's hard enough with the different maintenance scopes, but that can be codified into your property management software. And we use Property Meld, which is a fantastic piece. And it's got the ability to put in there stops on certain things, or pop-ups, if you will. Like for the HVAC, this particular system was replaced 3 years ago, and it came with a 10-year warranty. So call this contractor only on this property. So we're able to adjust and compensate in those kinds of ways. Other hard stops are locations. Other hard stops are fair housing oriented, where we don't let owners have anything to do with the tenant selection process. That's a recipe for ending up losing your business and them losing their house, and just a big mess, if not at jail time.
So how do you qualify and educate on the front side to where there's no surprises, to where when you're going to take a hard line about that, you don't have any sympathy about them pushing back, because it's more like, we told you so, not surprise. What does that qualification conversation look like on the front side without scaring people off?
Sure. And you do it in the form, for us, it's the form of FAQs that basically walks them through the first contact with us, through the first tenant moving out, and covers everything in between as a high overview thumbnail sketch that introduces all of these topics. So it produces additional questions. That's one of the things that you want them to do. You want them to ask questions, and you don't want them to ask simple yes/no questions. You want them to have open-ended questions so that you can expand on it and help them understand your philosophy, because that's what you want them to do. You want them to adopt your philosophy in basic property management, because if you have 3 different philosophies, 4 different philosophies, you better well have completely different systems and people in place for each one of those philosophies.
Well said. Scope of services is one of those issues that's just not obvious on the front side. A common story early on, you get in the business, you're taking any kind of property. If it has four walls, you're willing to manage it. When you think about how your business has changed on the monetization piece specifically, we're at a point in the industry where there's been so much conversation about fee maxing and revenue. What does that journey and evolution looked like for you? What's worked? What hasn't? What's made sense? What hasn't?
Right. Well, for me, the biggest thing has been looking outside from where we were, being willing to, again, adopt change, because forever our sole compensation was a monthly management fee and a leasing services fee. That was it. Didn't make any money
Simple.
on anything else. You might have made a little money on the application fee, but really otherwise, those were your three forms of income. We started adding fees such as a lease renewal fee. One of my favorites is a maintenance coordination fee. That maintenance coordination fee has paid the salary plus profit of any maintenance coordinator I've had in the last 15 plus years.
Tell me about that fee. When does that get invoked?
Sure. In our instance, there is a fee where if on maintenance that's anything more than $1,000, we're going to charge a percentage of what is spent beyond that $1,000. So if it's a new HVA system that's $5,000, we earn a maintenance coordination fee on the $4,000. And that way the owners understand that they're going to get covered the first $1,000 worth of maintenance without us having to charge any additional fee.
What's the reserve that you require your clients to keep on hand?
We don't require that because with all of our vendors, we've got 30-day billing. So that's going to allow us to pay it out as the next month's rent. And if it's a major project like that, we require them to go ahead and get the money to us.
What about the solvency of your owners? Do you draw a hard line around Class A, Class B, Class C properties?
Yes, we don't. We have very, very few Class C properties. Pretty much everything's A and B. I like to manage middle class America is where I'm at. So prior to what's happened with rent in the last in the last 6 months, our sweet spot was around $1,200 a month to $2,000 a month, and I'm in my market. That worked really, really well. Anything more than that, it's more of a luxury market, and there's different expectations from tenants and owners about that, and different understandings from owners about maintenance costs. If you got a 5,000 square foot, 5-bedroom, 4.5 bath home, you're not going to paint that for $2,000 or $3,000. It's just not going to happen. And the expectation of that is overcoming that was difficult. And in the affordable range below 1,200, is just incredibly management intensive and maintenance intensive because they're usually older properties, older components, and things just cost more to fix. And tenants tend to last as long. So the middle class America tenant is usually around 3 years worth of tenancy. And, the product is more easily managed and more easily maintained.
What does preventative maintenance mean to you, done well?
Preventative maintenance means to me that we've gone in and fixed something before it became urgent and maintain things in such a way to prevent them from falling apart due to negligence or due to lack of caring for it. Things wear out no matter what. Houses have all the pieces and parts of a house have a finite life. In fact, if you ever look at your appraisal of your property, when you buy a house, it will have in there that the remaining economic life of the property is usually around 30 to 35 years. That's what we look at. The whole house, if it's lasted more than 35 years, it's only because of maintenance. It's only been because we've been caring for it and keeping it up. But if you think about it, look at all that has to be changed and swapped out during that period of time. Every operating system has to be touched. Roofs have to be touched. Windows, doors, kitchen cabinets, bathrooms, lots of different things. So basically at that point in time, it's the foundation and the framing of the house. That is what's the longevity. Everything else in between needs to be touched and maintained. One of the best things we've ever done is partner with On-Site Pros to do our
great company.
Yeah, great company. They do what we call our annual property reviews. We don't like to use the I word, the inspection word, because people unfortunately associate that with a home inspection, which is $400 or $500 or more, and takes 4 hours and is really thorough,
detailed,
incredibly detailed. Whereas these guys are incredible documenters of the condition of the property, and so that's what we're looking for. And then they'll be able to tell us things that they think are going to be a concern. We're going to have, for example, a rotten window or a windowsill that's the paint is peeling on. If I can get that taken care of for $100, that's better than waiting another year or two and then having to spend $300 or $400 to replace the whole window or replace the rotten windowsill.
Talk to me about self-inspections. This has become more popular during COVID. It's interesting, at least on the level of something supplemental, but the idea of I, as the tenant, am going to document my lease violations seems delusional. What value, if any, is there in self-inspections?
Any documentation you get on the property while the tenant's there has some value, but you're right; it's not going to be probative as far as the ones we get, because it's amazing with the on-site pros reports. All of our properties are no smoking properties, but there'll be an ashtray on the coffee table. If they're not allowed pets, and we see the pet kennel, and we see the dog bowls, we see things like that. Because what's neat is that if they know I'm coming, they're going to clean up, and the house is going to smell like Clorox, and everything's going to be put away, hidden the dog someplace else, all that other stuff. But when it's those guys, it's just another contractor coming to the property, and they're much more comfortable with that. And we find more lease violations than we ever did when we did them ourselves. So the self one was an interim gap. That was a COVID quality type product. Long term, the only way I see that works would be to utilize a product like that for redocumenting the move-in inspection. So when the tenant moves in, we present them with a move-in inspection that we've completed, and they have an opportunity to contribute to that as a part of the move-in process. Both sides get an equal say, and they can then use that self-inspection product to document the move-in that they when they saw it. So if there's something that they feel like was a concern that we didn't, they have an opportunity to document it.
Speaking of lease violations, talk to me about how your lease and your management agreement have evolved and changed over time. How often do you go back to revisit, make changes and modifications?
Sure. Code changes or Georgia law changes obviously trigger those things, those events. And so that could be for a 5-year period. That was almost annually, but either the management agreement or the lease had to be updated because of changes in code. And a couple of times it was with an amendment rather than a whole rewrite. But as things change, as things evolved, as liabilities become aware, we become more aware of liabilities and responsibilities that we see in the industry. Even if they haven't happened to us, we know they've happened to others. We want to try and plug those holes as much as we possibly can. So my original management contract, was like my dad had, was just a 1-page. It happened to be a legal page instead of a letter size, but it was very, very simple. I think the best way to describe both of those documents, the original lease and the original management agreement, is they were formalized handshake agreements, is what they were. Very,
not a lot of
very
contingencies
loose.
Anticipated.
No, very, very, very loose. So with that, over time, we've evolved. We've taken, like all good property management companies, we don't reinvent the wheel. So if we see something we like that somebody else is doing, we might adopt that and work with our attorney to make it work within our frame of what we want to do. So my management agreement has now evolved into 8 pages. And my lease is involved into, I think 9. So we're plugging all the holes. We don't have to use the duct tape to seal up the holes in the floor anymore, for the cracks in the floor for things to fall through. And that's made a big difference. And because the beauty behind it is you can come back and say, I don't think I told you. I know I told you, and here it is. So that makes a big difference in helping things, working with folks with lease violations. One of the greatest things is with technology, with machine learning and AI, that's all coming, and I'm so excited about that. I think that's great opportunities for us as the industry continues to evolve. But right now, with the applications, we use pet screening, again, another great NARPM affiliate.
Absolutely. Shout out to John Bradford.
Absolutely. I mean, what a brilliant move on his part.
Nobody saw that coming.
No, and it was right place, right time. I mean, the prototypical entrepreneurial study that will be probably studied in business schools for quite a while. It's really great tool, but it's fantastic in the fact that we have a hard stop in our application that requires a specific style number that comes back from pet screening, that they either have signed the agreement that we will not have pets and we will not allow temporary pets or visiting pets or anything like that without landlord permission. Or they do have a pet and they go through the pet screening process and they come back and they put that number in, then they can complete the application. It has really done a great job of solving the ESA problem with us, emotional support animals. It's really minimized that because people have to meet the standards that our federal law requires. Because the great thing about fair housing in Georgia is it said the Georgia law says see federal law. So it's very simple. We don't have any overlay, and so we're able to then come back in and work with the federal requirements. And as long as they meet the federal requirements, we're okay with the ESA. But if they don't, they're a pet at that point in time. And we have seen multiple applications stall at that point and not proceed on because they either can't get the ESA certification that they want, or they don't want to go through that process. And that saved us, I think, a lot. And in a tougher market, a tenant's market versus the landlord's market that we're in, that might be a problem where we're walking some potential folks. But that's not a problem right now because for the last 3 years, my marketing time is measured in hours, not days and weeks.
What an interesting aspect of the industry. For more or less the entire time that I've been in the industry, tenant placement has not been a priority. I remember an era, I would say just before I came into the industry, where that felt like there was more emphasis and there was more of a burden. And I'm not saying that there's no emphasis, but in terms of demand and the volume of applications, talking to some management companies, you would almost get the impression that just the volume of tenant applications is kind of a pretty big organizational burden.
It is. It's huge. It's huge. We had one property that was on the market. And even though we kept telling folks, we do first come, first serve. And even though we were telling folks, we already have an application and we have this many backup applications already in line, in the queue. And so the person that we're processing, we either accept them and they accept us, or we move on to the next application. And we got to the point where there was 22 backup applications at one point.
And are they all paying for?
Yeah, they put the money up first, but I don't charge them the application fee unless I process the application. So they get their money back. So it's a good thing.
22 people applying.
22 people were so desperate for that house that they were willing to be 22nd in line, hoping that all the 21 ahead of them would fail in some way. Or not take the house.
When that sort of thing happens, does it ever make you question the rent rate?
Oh, absolutely. These days, trying to figure out how high up is to raise rents is crazy. I've never, in the 43 years I've been in real estate, I've never seen a market like this anywhere in the country.
Well, how far, there obviously is a limit. How does this play out? I feel for people in relation to affordable housing. This is a really unfortunate circumstance that fundamentally does not seem sustainable. How far can this go?
There will be a plateau, and it's going to be when finally it gets to the point of salaries, people's income versus what the property is. Plus, we as strategic, we're rejecting people sometimes simply because they don't make enough money. We have a requirement of 3 times the rent amount as the minimum gross income per month.
First applicant, common practice, liability reduction. If the liability wasn't there, certainly I don't think anybody could argue that it would be optimal. How do you balance that, particularly given that you're in Georgia, you have a little more leeway than, let's say, somewhere in California or the Northeast, et cetera. Do you have any peers in your market that don't practice first applicant?
Yes. There's a lot of folks that are really, it's almost the ones that have brokerage. Sales brokerages, because they think that the sales situation where you have to present all offers to a tenant, to a prospective owner, is different than in a lease situation where they're putting in an application and it's identical to everybody else's.
Because the criteria is even.
The criteria is absolutely even. So that's the reason we don't entertain doing something different, because where fair housing can really rear its ugly head is in that environment, where you're going to be comparing applicant A through G against one another head to head. Taking personal prejudices and personal experiences out of that and staying strictly with your model of rating folks gender neutral, race neutral, everything fair housing neutral, then you're those are the ones that almost always get in trouble with HUD and fair housing.
And obviously you could you could get at the same thing by raising the standard for the criteria, which would effectively have the equivalence of picking the best person. You could just globally raise the bar. Another out here is to use a third-party screening company to protect yourself a bit. What have you seen? What do you do in terms of screening? Have you used third-party screening companies?
Yes, I've always used third-party screening company because I don't want to belong to the credit reporting agencies. So we always use them to generate the information. They will many times they will take the information we've put in for our rating profile, and they will make a recommendation based upon our standards as to whether it's an approval, a conditional approval, or a rejection. But we always still come back and hand analyze every single one of them.
Oversight.
Just to make absolutely certain that we're making the best choice. I will tell you that in the last 12, 13, 14 months, we've been averaging about 4 applications before we get before we get one that truly qualifies.
Talk to me about owner communication, cadence, format, frequency. What are the best practices there?
Well, I think you can over-communicate, so you don't want to do too much, because one of the things you want them to do is trust you that you're doing the right thing and you're taking care of it every day. One of the things that they're also asking of you is take me out of this.
Make the decision.
I don't want to be there. I don't want to be there in the middle of this. And some owners are really hyper vigilant about maintenance costs. So if it's going to be more than X amount of dollars, I got to know, and don't you proceed without it unless it's a dire emergency. We try to minimize that as much by, again, continuing to improve. But then a lot of times we're able to change things after the first year or two with a client, that just where they can see they can trust us, that we're not willy-nilly spending their money.
It totally makes sense. It obviously is a fine line between wanting to service versus demonstrating your real expertise and your acumen. Right. People fall over the map here. And I think it's interesting when you hear management company owners talk about the pricing conversation in the sales format. And sometimes what perks up my ears is hearing folks say, well, they just want to ask about price and price and price. And the reality is, if you don't provide people alternative criteria, price is the only thing left to talk about. Right. How do you handle conversations about price?
Sure. Well, the first thing I do, I usually respond with a question, and it's almost, what are your goals and objectives in owning this piece of property? And I get them to try and talk to me about the way they own the property and what they're looking to obtain and get out of it, because I'll find out real fast whether or not price is the only thing that they're worried about. Because if price is the only thing they're worried about, they're going to be killing me over the fact that I spent $90 on a plumbing bill. Okay, and that's just a non-starter. And so we are very, very careful about that. We want clients that come in that are financially solvent enough that it's not going to be a big deal if they've got to take care of some maintenance.
If there was one piece of advice that you could give to the broad cross-section of NARPM newbies, folks that are new coming into the industry, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. The one thing is that you just cannot stop learning. You don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, it's one of those things like, coming out of college, I can't get a job without experience, and I can't get experience without a job. And it's very much the same way with property management. And as you're building up your portfolio and such, I would also say, pick a lane. Make sure that you build your niche, build where you want to be, limit your geography. Don't try and be everything to everybody. Also limit the portfolio you're willing to work on. That's why I don't do commercial. That's why I don't do mobile home. I don't do a ton of other things that produce an income stream. Just limit myself to SFR. I'm not interested in multifamily. I've done multifamily. I've done in the 80s and 90s, I was the duplex, triplex, quadplex king of that area. I built that inventory up to over 400, almost 500 units. But I was killing myself because that's what it took to make any money because of the rent and what the fees were at the time and what the minimums were at the time. So we reconfigured our inventory twice, once in the late 90s and then again a few years later, and have gone almost exclusively single family. I think I have 3 duplexes left that we manage.
Final question. If there was one NARPM class, because you've taught them all, if there was one NARPM class that you would recommend to a beginner, which one would it be and why?
It's a great question. First off, I don't think they're wrong with taking several of them and just choosing it down to one. I would say it's the risk management essentials, and that's simply because risk management is the key to having a successful, long-lasting business. It keeps me out of court, keeps me making money, keeps my clients happy. I've managed thousands of houses for thousands of clients with even more thousands of tenants. And to be able to still be here today, successfully doing it, I think says an awful lot about that philosophy of really understanding risk.
Well, thank you for your contribution to making that a great class and for educating the industry. Appreciate you coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jordan. It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, quick message on the Lead Simple front. We are hiring aggressively into a bunch of different roles right now. Head of customer success, finance and accounting manager, customer implementation pilots, customer success associates, software engineers, all over the place. So my question to you is, do you know somebody? Do you know somebody that might be interested or a fit for one of these roles? You can see the full scope at leadsimple.com/careers. Head of customer success, finance and accounting manager are the ones that we are focused on the most right now, but I'd love to have a conversation about any of these roles. So if you have questions, you can email me at jordan@leadsimple.com to understand the scope, the depth, and to know if anybody in your network might be a fit. We are a live crew, highly competitive, a little bit nerdy, and we love to have a really good time along the way as we work. So if this sounds like a fit for somebody that you know, love to hear from them. Thanks, guys.
Jordan here asking you, what do you got? What is a question you want to ask me? Can you stump me? Can you throw me something hard, perplexing, vexing, something you feel tied up in knots with? Throw it at me. I'll do my best to try and answer that question, to dissect it, to parse out the nuance and maybe help you get a bit more clarity. I'm looking for questions as the basis for creating content, and you're looking for answers as the basis for clarity. And wouldn't it be perfect if those two things matched up? Drop a comment, send me an email, jordan@leadsimple.com. Let's stay in the conversation. Peace.